Hello, I'm Todd Phillips, the editor of Canadian Auto Dealer. We're here today with Glenn Mercer. Glenn is a well-known auto industry researcher. He's likely best known to our audience for his regular appearances at the CADA Summit and at NADA events. And on February 12th this year, Glenn's going to be taking the stage at the CADA Summit again and tackling some key topics for dealers. Glenn, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, and thanks to CADA for inviting me to Toronto, one of my favorite cities. I live in Cleveland on the wrong side of a different lake. I always enjoy a visit to Toronto.
Well, we enjoy having you. I know you always do well in our speaker surveys when we review the speakers, so no surprise they invited you back. So what can dealers expect this year? What are some of the key topics we can expect this year?
Right. I'll be doing a two-part presentation. We'll talk about the first part here, and we can get into the other one as time permits. It's about a project for NADA called B2B, or Back to Basics. Those of your audience who have had the dubious pleasure of seeing me speak before may have heard me talking about something called DOT, Dealership of Tomorrow, which was all about the external trends buffeting the industry, whether it's autonomous vehicles or ride-hail or subscription services. But early this year, in talking to NADA about what to look at this year, culminating for NADA in New Orleans, the phrase trend fatigue emerged, that dealers in the United States, and I would imagine Canada as well, getting a little weary of waking up each morning and wondering what, asteroid was headed their way, extinction event, whether it's autonomous vehicles or connected cars or EVs or ride hail or whatever. And so we decided to sort of pull the focus back in, set those major trends aside. They're important, of course, to keep an eye on them, but really just focus on within the walls of the dealership over the next 7, 8, 12, call it 10 years, an outlook for dealership operations and finances within the walls of the store, digital or analog. And especially timely to do this because we're coming off the sugar high, as it were, of the pandemic and the chip shortage, where, as you know, profits got really juicy for a while, and now this question is sort of what's the new normal that we're reverting to. So I'll be spending about 2/3 of my time on stage talking about the results of Back to Basics. As we film today, the results are interim, but they'll be final when we see you in Toronto.
What's interesting about that is the focus reverts back to a certain extent of things that are within the dealer's control. Some of the other forces, you say they have no control over the pace of autonomous vehicles or
Right.
consumer adoption trends. So this is really helping them focus, I guess, on things that they can grapple with and implement within their own stores, right?
Right. And of course, I mean, given there's thousands of franchise new car dealerships across North America, it's not like they haven't been thinking about this already, and it's not like they don't already have good ideas. It's, I guess it's just a pausing, refreshing, and I've interviewed about 80 different people, dealers, accountants, dealership association executives, and vendors to sort of pause, refresh, take a deep breath, and look at this again. Oh, and by the way, this might be interesting given the United States and Canada are both former colonies of the British Empire. We're doing the project in parallel in the UK, and so I'll have a few comments on how it's similar or different in the UK as well.
That's great. We can't give away all the findings here. I noticed one of the areas of an asteroid maybe that's been in the works as a trend is the whole idea of, the dealer franchise model itself. Is it safe? Is it under attack? In Europe, you mentioned, the UK or otherwise. So I know you're also going to be looking for part of the presentation at the findings of a new study that the NADA commissioned, and that's really looking at the cost of the franchise dealer model against the direct, and
Right.
really a hybrid model that's a bit of both. So without giving away all of your thunder, what are some of the key findings that you'll be taking dealers through from that particular study?
Okay, so the two of them fit together. B2B, Back to Basics, kind of assumes the dealership system stays intact, and what does it look like going forward? The spoiler alert is pretty good. I'd say our consensus is that profitability will be rewarding. The fun factor may be declining as dealerships become more and more standardized, OEMs exert more and more control, And as one dealer called it out to me, will end up being family-owned company stores in a way. So will it be rewarding financially? Yes. Will it be quite as entrepreneurial as it once was? Certainly not. But that's sort of the spoiler alert on Back to Basics. This fits in well with the other project, as you mentioned, which is, I don't know, we've always got three-letter abbreviations, cost of distribution, COD, which really came up in the middle of the pandemic when certain OEM executives, I won't name any names, but his initials were Jim Farley at Ford, was going public with the dealership system costing me, $2,000 per car. And we were unable to really get from the various people slinging these numbers around the actual calculations they used to get to that. And so NADA said, well, if we can't get the numbers from the people throwing the numbers out there, we'll get the numbers ourselves. I was the project manager for this project. Oliver Wyman was the consultant. And looking at 32 million data points, it broke Excel. We had to go far beyond that over about 12, 14 years, looking at three different sales channels: traditional new car franchise dealership, now traditional, because Tesla is by no means a young startup anymore, direct to customer like Tesla does, and then something in between we called hybrid, but which is most familiar to the automotive world as agency, which we see in Europe, and of course you have an example of that in Canada as agency. And went through every single line item of every single activity that is done to get the car out of the factory and into the customer's hands, all the way down to how many times do we have to wash it, and built up a cost model and compared the three channels. The results were presented at the Automotive News World Conference in September, but the findings there, the spoiler alert, I guess you'd say, is the channels are extremely similar in terms of cost. There's no free lunch here, in that you have to do pretty much all the same things to get the car sold. There are nuances. For instance, one advantage you have to give to a direct-to-customer system like Rivian is one software vendor, that's it. One system. Can you imagine if you were a dealer and had one login and one number to call, in that regard? On the other hand, dealerships have other advantages as well. And so when we looked at cost, it was very, very similar. Then we had to add in value because the channel is not just a dead weight loss. Oh, something I have to do to get the car moved. If a car company wanted to reduce cost, they could save $1,000 a car by just not painting them. Right? Okay, so saved money, it's a cost. But there's a value to paint: corrosion resistance and attractive appearance. The same with the channels. And when we added the values back in, the dealership channel pulled ahead in most cases, and I'll explain why in a minute. On the values are, for example, an enormous value that the direct-to-customer channel provides to an OEM is it eradicates intra-brand competition. Rivian stores don't compete with each other on price, so you probably get a higher realized price over time. That's an advantage to DTC. But the huge advantage on the dealership side is, to use the technical and scientific term, puts butts in seats. By that I mean a dealership is essentially the Harry Potter sorting hat, as it were, where each customer who comes in, physically or virtually, is matched up with something in inventory or on order, and you get every car sold sooner or later matched up to a customer, which is very hard to do in a DTC world, where a customer might come in and say, I can get to within $50 a month to buy that Lucid, but I can't make the last 50. A dealer will find a way to get that done, whether it's allowing more on the trade-in or whatever, finding a different financing source. But in DTC, you kind of gum up the works at that point. So net, when we net cost and value out, the dealership channel pulled ahead by some amount. And of course, it is especially useful when supply exceeds demand. When demand exceeds supply, you can sell any way you want. I mean, Ferrari could shoot cars out of cannons or drop them from flagpoles, auction them, open a lottery, whatever. But when the bulk of the automotive industry, 95% of cars, 95% of time, we've got a little too much supply for demand, and that's where the dealership system really comes into play. And it isn't just a matter of provincial or state or federal regulations, because we look around the world. I was just in China, for example. 85% of Chinese cars are sold by dealers as well. So that was sort of the summation of that project. The big so what of that, and that's what fits into the BDP project, is to tell OEMs, and we did bring this to OEMs and talk to them about the findings, and they pretty much agreed, was maybe think less about changing the channel and think more about optimizing the channel. That there's no other channel out there where if only you could figure out what it was and could switch to it, all your problems would be solved. All the channels are very similar. They have different strengths and weaknesses, but it's really a matter of the one that suits your business model best, which again tends to be dealers because supply exceeds demand. Try to work on that with your dealer partners to optimize it, as opposed to hoping for the greener pastures, on the other side of the fence.
Well, hey, I'm going to stop you there just because, not because it's not interesting, because I want people to go to the summit and hear the
Yeah,
full real deal, as they say. But no,
right.
it's certainly a great overview of the back to basics, which the dealers will be keen to learn, and
Mm.
certainly some more detail about the study that puts them in a competitive advantage, and maybe lessens the impact of that particular asteroid from causing dealers anxiety at night. So,
Yep.
anyway, I look forward to seeing you again in February at the CADA Summit, and thanks for taking the time to give us an overview today.
I look forward to it as well, and I'll do the usual dad joke that you start dealing with in December, which is see you next year.
Thanks, Glenn. Have a great day.